Hello and welcome to this brief session on Harvard referencing. My name's Mark Wright and I teach on the Access to HE programme. I am also the support officer. This is not intended to be the definitive guide to everything about Harvard referencing. It's just meant to be a quick guide for stuff that's appropriate to level 3, which is what an Access course is. If anybody does want to revisit this video, please be careful if you go on my YouTube channel because there's two guides to referencing. There's this one which is Harvard referencing, but there's a similar one which is called APA referencing, which is slightly different, which is used by some of the HE courses, typically subjects like psychology and that sort of thing. And it might be useful if your tutor just pauses the video now and again, just so you can make notes as you go through it. But first of all, I just wanted to briefly talk about why referencing is so important in the general academic world and also on the Access to HE course. Well, first of all, the idea of the academic world is it's one big conversation. This idea that you can read an essay and then it leads you on to another piece of work, then another piece of work, then another piece of work. So I might be reading your essay and think, oh, that sounds interesting, that book by Smith. Then I can go away and read up that book and that'll lead me to another and another. It's a bit like a giant spider's web or a giant ball of wool, if you will. So in the academic world, it's incredibly important, which is why there's many different referencing styles. In terms of the Access to HE course, if you don't get referencing right, it can have quite a dramatic impact on your grade. Now, some subjects have 3 grade descriptors, some of them have 4 grade descriptors. In other words, you mark for things like understanding of the subject. There's one typically called application of knowledge. There's one called communication and presentation. And there's one which is the final grade, which is the quality grade, which is a summary of the piece of work as a whole. If the referencing's not quite right, first of all, it can affect the communication grade, which is where we tend to consider referencing the most. But in order to get a distinction for application of knowledge, which is where you demonstrate what we call breadth and depth of further reading, if the referencing isn't right, it can impact that quite dramatically. Just to explain that grade descriptor, because it often confuses people a little bit. In order to get a distinction for that particular one, you have to demonstrate breadth and depth of further reading. So breadth is the amount of books or the amount of websites that you've used, and depth is what you've done with them. So you've enriched the work with information from those sources. And if you haven't acknowledged the use of the sources correctly, that's obviously going to impact your ability to convey breadth and depth. So there's 2 things that you need with Harvard referencing, and it's pretty much the same for the other referencing styles as well. The first one is an in-text reference, which I'll show you how to do in a second, and I'll also show you how to do a reference list. Now, first of all, we're going to have a look at how to do an in-text reference. I've created a completely fictional book here. This is a book by Smith, which is published in the year 2000. We don't need to know the title of the fictional book just yet, so let's just stick with that. So Smith is the surname of the author. So there's 2 ways which you could have an in-text reference here. Some tutors may refer to it as a citation instead, but I like to call it an in-text reference. So at the top of the screen, you could have the reference at the start of the sentence. And that works particularly well with opinion and points of view. So as we see there, Smith 2000 argued that. Or it could be Smith 2000 put forward the idea. But if you want a sort of posh academic word, Smith 2000 posits that. Now you don't hear that word often, I like that one. Posits that. So that's the start of a sentence. But you could also, instead, have the reference at the end of a sentence. And there's no sort of written rule on this, but it tends to work much better for factual information. Because if it's somebody's opinion, you tend to have that at the start of the sentence. So here I've got a little statement about the funding to the NHS, and it's curly brackets. I assume there's a technical name for them, but I'm sure we know what we mean by curly brackets. The surname, comma, 2000, which was the year the book was published, curly brackets again, and note the placing of the full stop. The full stop in Harvard referencing goes after the last curly bracket. In that example there, people quite often make a mistake and put it just half after the NHS. That's not the end of the sentence, because you start with your next sentence, then it'll be Smith 2000, and that is not what we want. So there's two ways that you can do it, and that's what a typical book reference might look like for in text. Now, an internet reference might look exactly the same. So let's just imagine there is a BBC News article by this writer called John Smith, and it will look like Smith 2000 unless you don't know the name of the author. So in text it might just look Smith 2000, so he's written this BBC News article, Smith 2000, but if you don't know the name of the author, it doesn't say on the BBC website, you can put BBC 2000 like at the bottom of the screen there. The in-text reference for websites doesn't really look any different to as it does for books. It's actually in the reference list much later on where there is a big difference. If something has two authors, it would look a little bit like this. So if it's the start of the sentence, and I could have picked any names. I mean, I could have put Lennon and McCartney or Simon and Garfunkel, but they might have sued me for copyright reasons. So we'll stick with our fictional Smith and Jones. So it would be Smith and Jones, as in the word and, 2000, if it was at the start of a sentence. But if it was at the end of the sentence, in curly brackets, it would be Smith, the and symbol, and I think you get the and symbol by pressing, is it called the shift key on the left? It's difficult to say because on my keyboard it's an upwards arrow, and then the number 7, Jones, comma, 2000. So that would be if it was at the end of a sentence. Now, if you're familiar with something called APA referencing, this next bit might be a little bit different to what you're used to. I'm not going to go into what APA involves because it will complicate things. But this bit will be a little bit different for you. APA, by the way, is typically used by subjects like psychology, where papers will have sometimes 20 or 30 authors. So they have clever ways to make it a little bit different on the page. But in terms of Harvard referencing, if you have 3 or more authors, you can do this little trick, which is halfway down the screen, which is Smith et al. Full stop 2000. And in Latin, I believe et al. Means and others. We didn't do Latin a lot in Stockport when I was at school, but I believe that's what it means. So it's Smith et al. Full stop 2000. So that means and others. And if it is at the end of a sentence, it is Smith et al. Full stop, comma, 2000. So that's if you have 3 or more authors in the in-text reference. Something that's been brought up by students asking for advice about websites is a little bit confusing. Because sometimes students will often say to me, well, I found this really good website, but there's no date on it. So there's no year that it was put online to go in the in-text reference. Now, technically, the rule on this is that in the curly brackets, you put N.D. which means not dated. Now, that is the actual rule in Harvard referencing, but it's sort of seen as being an incredibly unfashionable thing to do. So there's no written rules about it as such. It's like when I went to Ibiza when I was a teenager. I wore socks and sandals by the pool. Now, there's no law. Feel free to laugh at that if you wish. There's no law against that, but it's sort of seen as a bit of a fashion faux pas in Ibiza. So try and avoid doing that. Try to stick to websites where there is a year with them. And pretty much all the BBC News articles I've seen, and other, of course, websites are available. The Guardian's a particularly good one. Again, it does depend what subject you're studying. They usually have a year on them. In terms of the reference list, now a few things to point out. First, the reference list is not included in your word count. So your reference list comes at the end of your, say, essay, report or presentation, whichever assessment method it may be, but it is not included in your word count. And it's where you essentially list all of the books which are referenced in the essay, booklet or presentation. So you're acknowledging what these books are essentially. You're giving us a little bit of detail about them. So your reference list would typically be in alphabetical order, and it would be all your books and websites put together in one big list. Now there is a different way to lay out the book and the website, which we're going to go through now. So for a book, typically it'd look a little bit like this. And again, I'd like to emphasize this is a completely fictional book with a nice, easy to remember name. So we'll look at the one at the top first, because there's 3 examples on there. One is for 1 author, another's for 2 authors, and another is for 3 authors. When you actually come to write your assignment, it might be worth going back to this video and just pausing that on screen. But there we have the author's surname, so Smith, comma, J, full stop. So J is the first initial, because we said it was John Smith before. Then in curly brackets, we have the year 2000, which is the year of the publication. Then you have the title of the book, which is usually in italics, full stop. Then it is where the book is published, followed by a colon, which is the 2 dots there. And then the publisher, followed by a full stop. Now, I'd like to point out one thing, and it's a slight issue really with Harvard referencing, that there is what I would call, this isn't the technical term for this, a bit of regional variation with things like this. So different institutions will sometimes do Harvard referencing ever so slightly differently. But this is the type of thing we're looking for. As an example, at some universities, after the year in curly brackets, they stick another full stop in, or they don't put a full stop at the end. At level 3, we're not particularly fussed about things like this. But when you go off to university, it's very, very wise to check out the referencing policy of that particular institution, because they might not use Harvard referencing, they might use APA, which is what a lot of universities now use. They might use Oxford referencing. I would assume they use that at Oxford University, but not many universities use that. So when I went off to do postgraduate study the second time at a university about 50-60 miles down the road, geography is not my strongest area, I thought I knew all about Harvard referencing, and I handed my dissertation in and I was marked down for it, because they do all sorts of strange things. Despite the fact they are a terrific university, I think some of it was highlighted in bold from what I remember. So that is the reference there for 1 author. For 2 authors, we have that and symbol there between the 2 names, Smith and Jones. And if it is 3 authors or more, we still have to list all the author surnames. So you got Smith, Jones, and Naylor. So there's a comma between every single one apart from the last 2. So Jones and Naylor, there's the and symbol there. So even if you had 8, 9, 10, 11 or 12 authors, all their names would have to go in the reference list. Again, if you're more familiar with APA, there is a bit of a difference that you go into there. But again, that's not why we're here. I'm just pointing that out. If you've done a course with APA and you're thinking, oh, he's lying to us. Well, I'm not. Genuinely, I'm not. What would be the point of that? That would be really, really bizarre. In terms of a website, again, this is a big difference from APA referencing. And I have spotted a bit of regional difference, as I call it, with this. But this is pretty much what we're looking for. So we have the author's surname and first initial there. Again, if you don't know the name of the author and it's a website, you could, for instance, put BBC here. So BBC 2000. The key thing is that it matches up with the in-text reference in your essay or presentation. So you've got the year, 2000, and then the title of the article. Again, this is a fictional article, so if you click on this link, it won't take you to this. But the history of the NHS is the title that would be near the top. Key things to include are, in square brackets, the word online. And then you would type in available at, and then a colon. And then you post what we call the URL. So you copy and paste the URL from the top of your website, and they typically look something like this. Sometimes they can go on for 2 or 3 different lines, but you paste that in, and it typically turns blue and goes underlined. That's fine. And then in curly brackets, you would put accessed on, and then the date in which you went onto the website. Again, there's a little bit of regional variation with that, but this is pretty much what we're looking for at level 3. Some of the Access courses, typically your sciencey kind of subjects, and I would assume this is the same for engineering, but I'm not entirely sure, will often have you referencing images, like diagrams and figures and things like that. To be honest, I would speak to your individual tutors about that, see how they want that laid out. My background is in the social sciences, so my expertise is really things like social psychology. And we don't really, in the social sciences, reference images. So I don't want to give you the wrong advice, because what I would call the cultural mores between different subjects, it can be quite different sometimes. So as an example, in a social sciences essay, you would never really use rhetorical questions. I was marking an art student's piece of work, which was a fantastic piece of work yesterday. I was giving advice and guidance in my support role, so I was trying to mark it and things. I said to them, I'm not sure if you should be using rhetorical questions in this, but the art teacher said, that's the thing we kind of do in art, get groovy, man, get used to it. So if you want to reference images in an assignment, see if it's appropriate for that assessment method, and just check with your tutor. So thank you very much for checking out my little referencing video today. I hope it has been of some help. Feel free to watch it again, and just be careful you don't confuse this video with the APA one, which is on my YouTube page. And as well, more than happy to look at drafts of assignments from any subject. Of course, I would be giving advice in terms of spelling, punctuation, grammar and structure. If it's social sciences based, I could help nudge people in the right direction, perhaps, with some of the ideas and recommended reading. For some other subjects, they're not really my specialist field, but I will do the best I can to help you out. So thank you very much for watching.